and welcome to our deep dive webinar on QuickBooks Enterprise. My name is Catherine Butts. I'm a senior consultant at Fourlane, and I'm very happy today to talk to you about accounts payable. In today's presentation, we'll discuss vendor setup and preferences, enter bills and pay bills, purchase orders, item receipts, bills, and pay bills. We'll review the relevant reports for accounts payable. We'll talk about vendor credits and the bill tracker. So we have a lot to cover. So accounts payable is the process of recording bills that are owed out to our vendors. For improved understanding of our cash flow and financial reporting, utilizing accounts payable helps us to provide insight into where our money will be going. And it's a vital part of the inventory workflow as well. Just like accounts receivable tells you about the money your customers owe to you, accounts payable tells you about the money that you owe out to your vendors. But before we dive into the accounts payable process, let's talk a little bit about setup. Accounts payable lives up here at the top of our home page, and all the tasks that we're going to talk about today live up here in this top portion. But let's also look at how our vendors are set up and some preferences relating to those vendors. You'll want to, and I'm going to come into my vendor center. I'm going to choose one of my lovely vendors, click on the edit button, and let's talk a little bit about the setup. You'll want to make sure whenever possible that your vendors have terms. The same list of terms in QuickBooks are used for both customers and vendors. You can pull down on that list to see the choices, or you can add new if you need to. From this screen as well, you can add account numbers, maybe for like a utility company. You can change your print on check name if it's not the same as your vendor name, and you can set up a credit limit. If you have vendors that typically use the same expense accounts, perhaps like rent, utilities, insurance, you can assign those default accounts here to reduce confusion the next time we're trying to enter a bill from this vendor. So making sure we have those pieces in place are important parts of this process. Next, let's go to Edit and then Preferences, and we're going to look at the company preferences relating to bills. These are the default settings in QuickBooks Enterprise, so I want to go over these. If you enter a bill for a vendor and your vendor does not have terms assigned, like we just talked about, QuickBooks is going to use this preference, which says 10 days, as the default due date for the bill. So if you've ever been curious about how QuickBooks is coming up with that date, it's here. This only applies in cases where the terms aren't assigned to the vendor. So if your vendors are typically like net 30, you can change this preference to 30. In this paying bills section, you can have QuickBooks automatically apply credits and discounts. I prefer to manually apply those, so I leave them unchecked. But using these options is a great one if you find that you often forget to take advantage of like vendor term discounts or to actually apply vendor credits. The last thing I want to look at in the preference is my preference on the checking side. And you'll note that you can select a default bank account per user that you can use for pay bills. So that's also an option that we can do in our company preferences setup. All right, let's come back into QuickBooks. Now that we have our vendors and preferences set up, let's take a look at our enter bills workflow. We're going to do a simple one to start. The standard workflow here is to enter a bill and then pay the bill. And you're going to notice that our line of the workflow shows us those steps that we need to take. We're going to enter a bill in here. I'm going to select my vendor, make sure my date is correct. Let's change that to today's date. I can enter in a reference number, and I can enter in my amount due. I have this expense account here that was set up as my default for the vendor, and I can enter a memo if I need to as well. Once I click Save and Close, this transaction is going to be posted into my accounts payable. So let's go ahead and take a look at some reports to see where this transaction lives. I'm going to navigate up to my balance sheet, reports, company and financial, balance sheet standard, and we can see our accounts payable balance right here. Now this balance is going to increase each time we enter a bill and decrease every time we pay one. But let's drill into that balance by looking at the AP aging summary report. So we're going to go up to reports and then vendors and payables and then AP aging summary. This report should tie to that balance on our balance sheet, and it breaks down the aging into different columns so we can keep track of any bills that we've kind of let slip through the cracks. We can drill down by double clicking and to finally see that original transaction that we just entered. Now that we've entered a bill and we've taken a look at where that bill has posted on our AP report, we can see that $78.50 up here. Let's go back to the home page and let's pay that bill. We have this nice direct line that tells us what our next step is, and the logic here is simple. If you enter a bill, you need to pay the bill. All too often, we break out of this enter bills, pay bills workflow, and we might enter a check, we might enter a transaction directly into the register, but we're never actually paying the bill. If we do that, that bill never gets paid, it never gets removed off of accounts payable, and it can lead to lots of confusion on your financials. If we keep this enter bills, pay bills process consistent, when you enter a bill, just be sure that you pay that bill. When I click on Pay Bills, the list of my available bills is entered here. I can see that I have my AT&T bill right here, and I'm going to select to pay that. At the bottom section, down at the bottom, I'm going to confirm my payment date. I'm going to confirm my payment method, which is either check or credit card. That can be a little confusing because what you're doing there is selecting whether you want to pay with a bank account or a credit card account. You can determine if you want to print later, which is helpful if you're doing a large check run that day and you want to print out a whole batch of them at one time, or you can assign the check number. You're also going to choose the account. Now here's a little tip. If you are paying electronically with ACH or wire, I would suggest that you click to assign the check number, and then when you go into pay bills, you can just type in something like ACH in the check number field to record how that transaction was paid. Once I click OK here, I get a little pop-up message that confirms that payment summary. I can print that bill payment stub if I choose, or return back to my pay bills window. So I'm going to click Done because we're about to move on to our inventory workflow. So our inventory workflow is this top portion here, and it begins with a purchase order. And it moves to the receive inventory, the enter bills, and then finally pay bills. But you'll notice the last step on that journey is still to pay bills. When we start with a purchase order, we're going to use this to order some inventory parts. A purchase order is a non-posting transaction, but its purpose is to describe to our vendor what we plan on ordering, and it also gives a heads up to our team that they should expect a shipment. So it does serve an important purpose here. I'm going to enter in all of the information from my vendor side, my vendor information, the items I'm ordering. I can enter in an expected date, and this transaction will kind of set the precedent for all of the related accounts payable transactions that follow behind it. Once I click Save and Close, I do have an open purchase order, and we're going to go back to our home page to take a look at the next step. The next step here is to receive in the items. So the reality of the situation is we place an order with our vendor. At some point, those products are going to be received into the warehouse. We do have two options on this menu here. receive inventory with bill and receive inventory without bill. We're going to walk through both, but we're going to start with receive inventory without bill, which I refer to as an item receipt. So the process here is that it's really common when products arrive in our warehouse and need to be counted and brought into inventory so we can start selling those or using those parts. To do this, we're going to choose to receive the inventory without the bill. And this will populate an item receipt based off of the PO. So I'm going to select my vendor. I get a pop-up that I have open purchase orders. I'm going to click yes. I'm going to select that purchase order here, click OK, and now this transaction has been populated out based on the purchase order. It's also going to close that purchase order because in this scenario, it'll have been received in full. But item receipts are special. They don't show up in my pay bills window until they've been converted to a bill, but they do hit accounts payable, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. When I'm entering in the item receipt, it is important that my item receipt have the correct date of when the product arrived. I need to make sure I confirm that. I also strongly recommend that you enter something into the reference number field, either referencing back to the PO or some other piece of information that's communicated back from the vendor, because your AP team is going to need that reference number to match that up with the vendor bill that arrives. And don't forget as well that you can attach documentation to this transaction with attach file. So this is a great place to attach perhaps a packing slip. Once I click Save and Close, let's go in and look at some of those reports. All right, now in my AP aging summary, I can see that that balance of the item receipt for canine imports, $243.50, does show up on my AP aging summary. However, when we go into pay bills, I'm not going to see that transaction in here, and that's because it's an item receipt and we've skipped a step. The next step on my journey is that we need to move from receive inventory into enter bills against inventory. This is the process where we convert the item receipt into a bill, that bill that we can pay. I want everyone here to notice this box that says use item receipt date for the bill date. This is so important because we need to maintain the original item receipt date all the way through to the bill. Item receipts and bills are the exact same transaction. The only change that occurs is that a bill can be paid in accounts payable and an item receipt can be not. Therefore, if you change the date of the bill, you're also changing the date the product was received. So if you received this product on the 17th, but you don't get the bill until the 22nd, that item receipt date has to maintain itself even when it becomes a bill. This is going to help you to avoid having your inventory go negative. Just always maintain the item receipt as the date on the bill. This bill will populate based on the item receipt. And you might need to add some additional charges in here. You might need to add, for example, some shipping and handling charges on the expenses tab. That's totally fine to do. You might also find that some of our costs have been adjusted when you actually get the vendor invoice. That's fine as well. What I suggest here is that if you need to adjust this date, right, because this bill is not due on the 22nd, or 27th, it's due, let's say, on the 10th, I would leave this date the same. This date is the same between item receipt and bill, and I'm going to adjust the bill due date. Remember, you can have a memo as well, but recording this transaction will allow us to be able to pay this bill. So I've done PO, receive inventory, enter bill, and now I'm going to pay the bill. And here's my canine imports that I can now pay. Let's take a look at our AP aging detail report. We're going to come into reports, vendors and payables, and then AP aging detail. The AP aging detail contains both item receipts and bills, as well as vendor credits. And remember that this item receipt down here at the bottom that I received on February 16th is telling me that I received this product, but I never got a bill from the vendor. Well, that seems a little fishy. So I probably want to follow up with that vendor before that vendor comes and follows up with me. So keeping an eye not only on the AP aging summary, but also on the AP aging detail to ensure that item receipts are being converted to bills is an important process here. And remember that following the line from purchase order to item receipt to bill and then pay bills is also establishing good accounting controls. Oftentimes, different members of our teams are going to be creating the purchase orders than the people that are going to be receiving, and maybe our accounts payable team is responsible for that enter bill pay bills part. But generally speaking, more than one person is touching a piece of this process. You can tailor your user permissions to design this workflow and maintain good communication so that everybody has access to the documentation and forms that they need within their realm. So if you've ever accidentally paid a bill without having received the product, or you've received a product and then get that nasty phone call from your vendor saying, "Where's my payment?" having a good AP process can help. So thinking about these steps as it relates to your business can help you to really refine this process. Now, within this process here, there are times when we might want to bypass that item receipt. We do have these two options here. We have receive inventory without bill, which is that item receipt I just mentioned. We also have receive inventory with bill. And this is a bit of a different situation here, but it could happen. So for example, let's create a purchase order. I'm going to create a copy of this one. And I have an open purchase order out here from my favorite office supplier. And office supplies are a little different than my inventory parts. Those just get dropped off at the front desk and they're non-inventory parts. It's totally okay for me in my business process that I'm going to receive this inventory with a bill, because I know the guy who drops off the supplies from the office supply store is also going to drop off the invoice. So by doing this, I am bypassing that item receipt process and doing just the bill. So that might be an option for you in your workflow. So that is something to consider. Again, I still recommend updating with a reference number here. Let's talk a little bit about vendor credits. So if we need to return a product, and say some of those products that we got from our canine imports were defective, we might need to return them and create a vendor credit. Vendor credit is the opposite of a bill, so we'll start here to enter it. So if you notice at the very top of the bill screen, there's a small toggle here for credit, and this will turn this into a vendor credit. Let's enter a transaction here. And I am using the items tab here, but you can also follow this same process with expenses. If I use the item receipt, excuse me, the items tab, I am decreasing the quantity on hand of my inventory parts. That's something to be aware of. I am also creating a debit balance or a negative in my accounts payable, which is later going to be able to be applied to a bill. When I click Save and Close here, that transaction is now going to show up in my AP aging detail as a negative. Let's convert this item receipt to a bill, and let's look at applying that credit for Dog Supplies R Us. If I come into Pay Bills and I select my Dog Supplies R Us, I notice at the top that I have an outstanding bill for $5,500, and it's just tough to notice, but I also have a credit here. So for total credits available, I have $550. This is easily overlooked, so it's worth reviewing. I can see that if I look at my AP aging detail, I can see that negative number here. I can also look at my AP aging summary to see that I have a positive and a negative balance, but I do have to come in, because of the way I set up my preferences, that I like to be in charge of credits. I'm going to click Set Credits, and I'm going to elect to apply that. So now the balance that I owe to Dog Supplies R Us is only $4,950. So that's going to apply that credit and pay that bill for $4,950. The last thing I want to review today is our bill tracker. The bill tracker is one of our hidden gems in QuickBooks. It's worth exploring if you haven't seen this before. Where we'll see our vendor center is in the vendor center, I have my bill tracker here. I can also access it from vendors and then bill tracker here. If you don't see this in your version of QuickBooks Enterprise, most likely your role setup might not give you permission to see the bill tracker, even if you have full access. But you can enable this in your user role. You can think of the bill tracker like a dashboard for accounts payable. It's a one-stop shop to be able to review open purchase orders, open bills, and our overdue bills. And you can take actionable items in the bill tracker as well. For example, with open purchase orders, if I know I'm never going to get this purchase order, I can go ahead and close this PO right from this screen. I also have actions to be able to convert directly to a bill, email, or copy that PO. From the Bills tab, I can see that I have my bills and credits here. I can select and I can actually pay bills right from here. And if I click in the red square for danger here, I can also see that I have an overdue bill, as well as keep track of all of the bills that I have outstanding. So the bill tracker might be one of those things that you haven't explored yet, but if you do have members on your team who are kind of mostly focused on accounts payable, this is a great way to be able to view that information. Now, the other way that we can view similar information is by going into our vendor center and coming into our transactions tab. I can see the same kind of information this way. I can, for example, take a look at those bill payments. I can look at bills, but also filter for open bills or overdue bills. I can look to see if I have any item receipts that have not been converted out into the into a bill. And I can look at my open purchase orders. I can look at all or open. So once again, if you're not familiar with that bill tracker, if you don't see this icon here, it might be because you don't have the user permissions for it. But the bill tracker icon, if you can see it, it's going to exist teeny tiny up at the top of our vendor center, or also up to vendors and then bill tracker here. By the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to post those. We always like to get questions answered and follow up. If there's anything that I can help with, please let me know. I hope you found this overview of accounts payable to be helpful, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.